Hey guys, what's up? Steve Cam from nerdfitness.com here with a very special guest, one of my personal heroes and Yoda, nerd, New York Times bestselling author, Tim Ferriss. Tim, welcome to the Nerd Fitness Rebellion, dude.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. Dude, I have to say thanks. I remember reading the 4 Hour Work Week. Geez, was that 5 years ago when it first came out?
5 years ago, hard to believe.
5 years ago, and I bought nerdfitness.com the next day.
Nice.
So that led me to where we are today. So I have to first of all say thank you very much for that, or I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now.
Awesome. Well, thanks for putting it into action. I just put the words down, so I appreciate it whenever somebody does something with it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so for those out there that are, currently living under a rock and aren't familiar with your previous books, can you quick tell us a little bit about the 4 Hour Work Week and the 4 Hour Body, specifically how you take efficiency in the 80-20 rule and get a lot done with a little bit of effort?
Yeah, sure. So whether it's the 4 Hour Work Week, 4 Hour Body, 4 Hour Chef, the underlying principles and themes of all the books are the same, and that is looking for uncommon solutions and the shortest path from A to B. It's not necessarily about shortcuts. I think this is a common misunderstanding. It's about elegance. So like Toyota lean manufacturing, removing as much as possible so you have the simplest, cleanest solution possible. In the world of work, one of the tools for doing that is the 80-20 analysis, where you're looking at the 20% of activities or customers or products that produce 80% of or more of your profits, say. There are different ways you can use metrics, and you can do the opposite, which is what a lot of people don't do, which is what are the 20% of products, services, etc., that are consuming, say, 80+% of my time or expenses or what have you. The general approach that I take as the writer for doing these books is trying 1,000 things, being the human guinea pig, and then reporting back on what has some scientific support and what works, whether that's looking at remote control CEOs and so on and so forth in the 4 Hour Work Week, which end up being used, oddly enough, by groups at Google and Microsoft and even the CIA, believe it or not. I did some work with them. I know, it's wild. Who knew? And then the 4 Hour Body, which is where I was a human guinea pig again for 3 years, trying everything imaginable, legal, illegal, and in between, for improving fat loss, muscle gain, endurance, hacking the NFL Combine, holding your breath with David Blaine, whatever, you name it. And it's sort of a choose your own adventure book. And then the last one's about accelerated learning as it relates to all things, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, so I have 4 Hour Chef right here. Dude, you could do bicep curls with this thing, I think, and add that to your 4 Hour Body workout.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a cookbook, but it's about so much more than that. I read it all the way through, cool. And you cover things like memorizing decks of cards, 3-pointers, hunting deer, catching pigeons with one hand while sitting in a park, Alessandro Ambrogio, and what to do with this upcoming apocalypse that's right around the corner. Can you talk a little bit about how you use cooking to teach instead of just teaching people to cook?
Right. So cooking was chosen for this book. My readers have been asking me for a book on accelerated learning for 5 years. I mean, since the first book came out, because a few of my articles that on the blog that did really well right off the bat were about language learning, because that's something that I've spent a lot of time obsessing on for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And I never found the perfect storm, like the perfect opportunity to write this book. And now that I have more access and more resources and everything, I was able to choose and decided to choose cooking because it had defeated me so many times in the past. I'd quit so many times in the past. It's like, it's too much time. It's so inconvenient. I hate cleanup. That's why I make the money I do, so I can go out to eat. Like, I don't want to cook. I don't want to cook. And so I decided to tackle that because, number one, there's so much overwhelming information out there. There's just an avalanche of information. Secondly, you use all 5 senses in cooking, so it transfers to almost everything. I mean, for me personally, cooking, basically going from black and white to HD in cooking meant I went from black and white to HD experiencing food, experiencing drawing, weirdly enough, like shooting 3-pointers and all of that. It transferred to everything. It was so weird. Music, oddly enough, you'd never think that, but it's been wild. So you can use cooking as this gateway skill to learn everything else. Now, that doesn't mean you have to cook for the rest of your life. It could be just a week. But as you've noticed, the content of the book The stories are told through cooking, just like the stories are told through motorcycles and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. But there's a lot, like you said. There's Victoria's Secret models. There's Calvin and Hobbes cartoons. Killing chickens, hunting deer. It's got a little bit of everything. But what I'm trying to teach, a lot like Mr. Miyagi would teach, wax on, wax off, and then he'd show them what it was for. By doing specific things with food, I'm teaching you skills that apply to anything, whether it's Spanish, searing a steak, archery, whatever. It doesn't matter. And that grand recipe is this process of meta-learning, which I've applied to everything and done a lot of it publicly. I mean, whether it's the languages or Japanese horseback archery or some other crazy-ass thing that I subject myself to. And one thing, I've that I haven't really said all too much, but it's true, is that if I had all of the access and resources in 2007 that I have now, I probably would have written this book first. This probably would have been the first one. Yeah, this probably would have been the first one. Because everything else like what I was able to do in the 4-hour work week and the 4-hour body was dependent on the ability to test and learn things quickly. And that's what this is all about.
Very cool. So I love the gamification aspect of the 4-Hour Chef, specifically in the back cover. Yeah. Like you can award yourself points by every time you cook a meal or cook a variation on it. Obviously, I run a website called Nerd Fitness. We are huge on the gamification aspect. Awesome. Yeah. Why does gamification work? Like, I have my ideas, but I'm interested to hear, why you decided to include it in yours and what makes gamification so popular these days and how it helps people actually get things done.
Yeah, I think so. Gamification, of course, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly with gamification, and there are some instances where I don't want gamification. I just want something really simple and clean. But in other instances, I think specifically as it relates to behavioral change, right? Like I don't need, let's say, my bank to gamify like my banking right. experience. I don't want that.
You already got the money, right?
But if you're trying to adopt a new behavior or a new skill, whether it's exercise or diet or cooking, for instance, it's very helpful. And that is because when most people are learning a new skill, they don't have progress markers. Now in fitness is a bit unique because if you track your workouts, say, you do have progress metrics based on number of reps, amount of weight, whatever it might be. But it's what I wanted to do was set out signposts for cooking so that people would have a very distinct, very precise way of grading themselves. So how am I doing? Oh, I'm up to this many points. And it would also help to hopefully encourage them to follow the lesson plan. All right. So if you look at the lesson plan, like the first recipe, which is one of the easiest, is very disproportionately high in its number of points because the lesson that this Asabuco teaches is very, very important. And I had proofreaders who would skip it because they'd say, oh my God, Asabuco is too complicated. I'm going to go do the sexy time steak recipe for, a testosterone loading. That's 30 pages later. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That is 100 times more complicated than the first recipe. And to try to encourage, and the reason the Asabuco is first is because it is easier to make this $35 entree for 4 to 6 people than it is to scramble eggs properly for 1 or 2 people. It takes 5 minutes of prep time, and I want that sort of mind-blown experience to be had by every reader. It's very important that it happens at that precise point in the book, and having points helps with that. Now, will it help everyone? I don't know. Will it help some people? Yes, it will, and some is good enough for me.
Very cool. All right, so a lot of people in Nerd Fitness are brand new to this whole diet and fitness thing. They get the majority of their meals from a drive-thru window or the frozen food section of a grocery store. Yep. How do you help out that person who is so brand new and absolutely terrified of a kitchen from getting started? What do you tell that person?
Well, what I would say is just change your breakfast. So the first thing I would do is have them change their breakfast. And they could also do dinner, I suppose. But one of the problems with cooking, and this is why I failed for so long, I realized, is that when you're asking someone to learn to cook, it's not one thing. It's 5 or 6 discrete new behaviors. So you're asking someone, I remember trying cooking, right? I find a recipe. Oh, this looks great. Let me try this. Okay, first of all, there are 12 ingredients. I don't know where any of them are in my grocery store. So I go to the grocery store. I spend an hour looking for this shit. Pardon my French, and it's super frustrating. Then I have to wait 20 minutes in line. Then I get home. I have to unpack it. I have to prep it. I don't know how to prep. That's a new skill. No idea what I'm doing. Then cooking, also, of course, new. Maybe it turns out, maybe it doesn't. And then there's the cleanup, which is thankless and miserable typically. So that's 5 new habits. If you try to get, for instance, a 50-plus-year-old person to quit smoking by using a texting program, they almost always fail. Why? Because that's 2 new habits. So if you try 5, of course you're going to fail. It's like when people try to do everything under the sun at the same time for fitness, usually they quit. And in the case of my dad, I'll just give a quick example. So for fat loss, for the 4-Hour Body, my dad had 100-plus pounds to lose. I did not have him change his meals up front. I did not have him go to the gym for the first maybe 8 weeks. What I had him do was consume 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of waking up. That was it. It was just a Myoplex shake. Is it perfect? No. Myoplex has a bunch of garbage in it, but it was. Right. I knew it was something he would do, and something I've said before is, the decent program you follow is better than the perfect program that you quit. So with cooking, what does that mean? Well, one of the ways I like people to experiment with cooking is, let's say breakfast. Okay, eggs. Eggs are they're pretty fast, right? Even if you're used to doing like a lean cuisine or something in the microwave, eggs are going to be just as fast. And I would open them up to different flavor combinations. That if they want, let's say, Middle Eastern eggs, boom, like that, they've got Middle Eastern eggs. If they want, Italian eggs, slight tweak, and they're done. And so that would just require getting maybe 5 or 6 different herbs or spices and experimenting in the mornings. It's something you're doing anyway. It's not an additional load, right? And so even personally, like I cook breakfast at home, but I did that even when I was a non-cook. I just like quickly fry some eggs and I'd be done. 2 seconds. They were always pretty horrible, like completely annihilated. But so teaching someone how to improve something they're already doing like that, I think, is a very smart place to start. The other thing I would say is the worst time to practice a new skill is when you're under pressure to create a meal. This is also something where I think cooking messes up. And a lot of people mess this up in 100 different ways. But you do not want to have to learn how to use a knife when you need to get food on the table in 20 minutes. That's the wrong time to learn how to use a sharp knife.
Or in a knife fight.
Or in a knife fight, even worse. Right. So a much better approach would be to get, let's say, a lettuce knife, which looks like a real knife. I mean, it has the same shape as a chef's knife, so you can practice the proper hand grip and control. And just like watch TV and cut celery. Practice that skill when you have no stakes at all, when there's no risk at all. And this is what I do with like everything from marksmanship to archery to almost anything that I find intimidating. I practice under circumstances where there are no consequences. There are no consequences. And then when you go to the kitchen to actually use it to make a meal, you, instead of feeling anxious and quitting cooking altogether, you'll be like, okay, I've done this before. This is fun. So those would be a few of the tips that I would say are really helpful. What else? Let me just think about it. So, and where I might actually start, nerds who really have never cooked and maybe even have no desire to cook, is there's a section of the book on learning to taste and deconstructing food that you can do as an eater. Just learning to distinguish the million colors as opposed to just good, bad, hot, cold, spicy, not spicy. So I might have them start there.
Very cool. All right, so let's move on to learning new skills and making changes. Like most superheroes, you are a man of humble beginnings. How does the fact that you didn't win the genetic lottery affect how you approach skill learning and who you go after as far as mentors?
It makes all the difference because I look for the anomalies, the people who are really good at something who shouldn't be good at it. And what I mean by that is rather than emulating, let's say, the example I use in the book is Michael Phelps and Shinji Takeuchi. So when I wrote this book, the 2 most viewed swimming videos were number 1 of Michael Phelps in the Olympics. Number 2 is of this middle-aged Japanese guy named Shinji Takeuchi. And
identical, right?
Yeah, right. And so their methods of swimming are different. Their training is totally different. And unlike Michael Phelps, who learned to swim at like age 5 or something like that, Shinji learned to swim in his 30s, and he's now the CEO of Total Immersion Swimming. So Shinji is someone who's extremely good technically at what he does, but he shouldn't be. Like, he started way too late, and he also uses the wrong technique. Like, he doesn't really kick with his legs much, just enough to rotate the hips, and it's beautiful. It's effortless, and that is how I ended up learning to swim. 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, after not being able to swim at all my entire life. Growing up on Long Island, that's pretty embarrassing. And I scan the entire landscape, looking for anomalies, like Ed Cook, who can memorize a shuffle deck of cards in less than a minute. But that's not because of some genetic gift. That's from training. He knows how to coach people to do that, and he has coached people, which is another one of the questions I ask. Have they replicated their results with anyone? So Ed has trained people like Joshua Foer from absolutely nothing to national memory champion in, I think it was a year. All right, so these things are teachable. That's the fascinating part. Or other friends of mine like Josh Waitzkin, who is the basis for Searching for Bobby Fischer. He's chess prodigy. That's how he's looked. He's looked upon as a chess prodigy. What people don't realize about Josh, because he's a very good friend of mine, is he's also I think he's world champion or like 10-time national champion in Tai Chi push hands. He's also the first black belt under Marcelo Garcia, who's like the Michael Jordan plus Wayne Gretzky of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Josh has a recipe that he uses when tackling these skills. He has a particular process, and part of it has to do with things that are very contrarian, like learning something backwards. When he learned chess from his first really formal coach, they didn't start with the openings, they started with the end game. They started with king and pawn against pawn. That was it. That's how they started. So when you start to model these anomalies, you pick out these really uncommon options for, say, learning a language in 8 to 12 weeks instead of 8 to 12 years. And it's not like this is science fiction. You can find people who do this routinely, and then all you have to figure out is, what's their algorithm? What's the actual recipe that they're using, and then you copy it and you try it. So that's what I've been doing for the last I've been doing it for like 15 years, but this is the first time I've actually put it into a book.
Very cool. So a lot of people are interested in learning a new skill, or like you said, maybe trying to cook, or maybe sign up for a dance class, or even go up and talking to somebody. Yeah. They are absolutely terrified of failure.
Yeah.
What do you say? I mean, you can't just slap them in the face and say failure is going to be okay. It's not like you have to actually get them to get over the fact of failure. What can you tell those people?
It depends on who I'm talking to. I mean, if I'm talking to, we use the term nerd. If I'm talking to somebody, the way that I usually present it is, it depends on the audience, but there are a few different ways. One is, number one, you want to learn to think scientifically, and scientists run experiments. Experiments fail all the time, i.e. you have a hypothesis, and the experiment does not either meet your expectations or invalidates the hypothesis, whatever it might be. And that isn't failure. It's iteration, right? So that's sort of the logical argument. The more emotional argument is, or perhaps emotionally compelling argument, is to have someone do fear setting. And you probably remember this from the 4-Hour Workweek, where you would write down all the worst things that could happen. So it's like, oh my God, I'm going to approach some girl. Okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? Worst. Okay, she could call me like a creepy pervert and like run away. She could slap me. She could da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you go down the list. Okay, fine. So that's my list. Now it's not like I'm afraid of getting rejected. It's like I'm afraid of these very specific worst case scenarios. Okay, This is better. Because just like with goal setting, like to conquer your fear, just as to achieve your goals, you need to be specific. All right. So again, back on this piece of paper, we have all these worst case scenarios. Like it could be quitting your job. It could be starting your own company. Doesn't matter. But let's say it's this girl, right? All these terrible things that could happen. She could mace you and leave you crying on the sidewalk. Okay. Then the second column is, what could I do to minimize the likelihood of all these things happening? Okay. Those are the minimizing. And then, third is, if these things actually happen, what could I do to get back to where I am now? And what you realize is even with these ridiculous worst case scenarios, once you write them down, you're like, that's ridiculous. That would never happen. But when you write all this down, you realize, okay, going back to, let's say, the quitting the job thing or starting a company. If I start this company and it doesn't work out, how hard is it going to be for me to either come back to work and get back to where I am now? Not very hard. Maybe it takes a few months, maybe it takes 6 months. I'm not going to be out of my home. I'm not going to blow up. And I think that fear setting is a very important process. That's the only way that I'm able to get past some of the things that I fear. And fear is a normal emotion. That's the thing too. I wouldn't say that people are wrong for feeling that. And Cus D'Amato, who was Mike Tyson's primary trainer when he was unbeatable, because Mike Tyson was so nervous before his fights that he would vomit. And
Wow.
Cus D'Amato said to him, the hero and the coward feel the same thing. It's what they do that makes them different. So I think that's a pretty good,
I like that.
pretty good motto to live by.
Very cool. All right, man. So you are a type of person that has constantly remade yourself and made yourself with productivity and habit building habits. Despite all of that, and you've changed so many things, I'm assuming, in your life over the past couple of years. Do you still have any bad habits that you can't kick yet, like biting your nails or picking your nose or something?
I have tons of bad habits. And lots of vices. But the key is not trying to, from my standpoint, what's important is multiplying and leveraging your strengths as opposed to trying to fix every single one of your weaknesses. As long as you can get the big good things done, having stupid little habits here and there is okay. But you need to focus on your strengths. And in some weaknesses you need to fix, but not all of them. I mean, one of mine, which is so stupid, but it's always been a thing for me, is hitting the snooze button. Like, I will wake up, and there are days when I don't want to get out of bed. I will hit the snooze button, and keep in mind, it's going off like every 5 minutes, right? I will hit the snooze button for an hour, 2 hours maybe, if it's like a Saturday. And it's so dumb. You know, my girlfriend's just like, why don't you just set the alarm for an hour later? Like, really? And I'm like, I don't know, because this is how I do it. It's dumb, but like this is kind of how I do it. Other bad habits, God, I've got tons. What other bad habits do I have? I procrastinate all the time. I mean, what's really funny is people are like, what does a normal day look like for you? And I'm like, it's like 80% procrastinating and 20% focusing on my most important one or two to-dos on my list. And that's fine as long as I focus on the one or two most important to-dos on my list. If I'm too busy, like running to the UPS store to mail some nonsense, returning phone calls that can wait, if I do that, then I'm toast. Then I'm game over, I am dead, and I'm not going to be remotely productive. If I waste 80% of my day and then spend 20%, let's say 30%, you know, let's just make it like 2 hours on my most important one or two to-dos, like the one or two things that would change everything else, I'm going to end up more effective, more productive than 99.9% of the people out there. Even though I am, screwing around for 80% of the day. Now, I try for it not to be 80% of the day, but I do procrastinate a lot. I mean, with writing, like writers would rather do anything besides write. And I think it's critical to realize that what you do is more important than how you do it. So doing a lot of things quickly does not make them important. And great models for that are like really old executives. Study really old executives, because they're just like the men, at least, like these old cantankerous guys. They're not moving real fast. They can't figure out email. They're not on Twitter, but they get lots of shit done because they focus on the handful of things that they can get done with their limited physical energy that really have an impact. And I think that emulating sort of the technique du jour is a dangerous habit because the timeless principles still apply.
Very cool. All right, so a big part of the 4-hour work week was specifically this kind of digital nomad, traveling like crazy, building your business, running it from a laptop. You've traveled everywhere. Are there any places that you haven't gone to yet that what's the number one place on your list as far as places you want to go but haven't been yet?
Indonesia is pretty high on the list. Really fascinated by the language, by the people. by the diving. I love scuba diving and surfing and whatnot. So Indonesia is very high up there. I'd really like to visit Myanmar, so Burma, Cambodia. Big fan of Southeast Asia. Let's see. The list just goes on and on. I mean, I've never been to Russia. I've never been to the Ukraine. I've never been to Latvia. So there's a pretty long list. But right now, I'd like to go somewhere warm, preferably. And Indonesia is pretty hot.
Very cool. All right, let's rattle off a bunch of nerdy questions for you. What's Lord of the Rings or Star Wars?
Star Wars. And
Star Wars?
Yeah, I could recite every single line from that movie. I still have all, like, my original Boba Fett with, like, the arm chewed off. So I was a little kid. Oh, yeah. I got to go Star Wars. That's how I grew up.
All right, Jason Bourne or James Bond? Yeah, we asked the hard-hitting questions in Nerd Fitness.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go with Jason Bourne because he's against the system, not part of the system. But only the first Jason Bourne, the Bourne Identity. I can't stand the other ones. And as far as James Bond goes, I mean, Sean Connery and then Casino Royale, and that's pretty much as far as I go.
Okay.
But I've seen both. No, I want to add one thing. So when I write my books, I do it late night typically, and I'll put movies on mute that I've seen before, and I'll just put them on loop. So I wrote probably half of the revised 4-Hour Workweek with Jason Bourne Identity, and then I wrote almost all of the 4-Hour Body with Casino Royale.
That's awesome. Yeah. All right, if you could have any superpower in the world, what superpower would that be?
Oh, man. I'm just going to go with flying. I know it's cheap applause, but I like toying around with lucid dreaming, and one of the things, the two things that everyone does when they first kind of start experimenting with lucid dreaming, which is when you can mold your dream content, which has been experimented with at Stanford University and stuff. It's very verifiable. They fly around all the time, and they have sex with everybody they want to have sex with in their dreams. Those are the two things that everybody, at least guys, that's what guys do. They fucking fly
Nobody
around.
would wake up, man.
They fly around, and they fuck everything. And so, yeah, flying. I'd say flying. Why not? I'll go with flying.
All right. I got two last questions for you. First one is, what's next, man? Like 4-hour astronaut, 4-hour surgeon, 4-hour what?
I am not sure what is next, and I'm actually very comfortable with that and very excited about it. I think this is going to be the last 4-hour book. We'll see. But to me, I don't have insight into everything, certainly. There are lots of things I haven't explored, and I'd always idolized Benjamin Franklin, at least for the last 20, 25 years. And this is my attempt to provide his healthy, wealthy, and wise to my readers. So you have healthy, 4-hour body, wealthy, 4-hour workweek, and then wise is 4-hour chef, which is this comprehensive book on accelerated learning. And I don't know what's next. I'll probably try something outside of books before. I may come back to books, but I'd like to try something outside of books before I come back to it. So we'll see.
Okay, and last question. I need some advice. So I bought this Brazilian Portuguese Ferriss book, convinced I was going to start learning Portuguese. I bought this like 2 months ago, dude. I haven't even opened it yet. I just, it's been sitting on my counter. So after taking a tip out of your book, I've upped the stakes and I'm headed to Carnival in Brazil in February. And I decided I'm going to have to, one, learn how to have a conversation in Portuguese with a native, and two, participate in a capoeira rota while I'm down there. I'm at level 0 on both, but I have 2.5 months and all the time in the world. I'm ready for this thing. What kind of advice do you have for a chump like me?
Okay, where are you right now? Where are you located?
I'm in Nashville, Tennessee.
Nashville. Okay, I'm not sure how much.
Yeah, the heart of Brazil, right?
I'm not sure how much capoeira you have over there, but so for the capoeira, I'll just touch on that first. You're going to need to limber up your hips and your shoulders in a major way. So I would
stop sitting.
Stop sitting. Yeah, you're going to need to fix those hip flexors. So I would say focusing on either capoeira or breakdancing. If you need to find someone for breakdancing, just focus on 6-step or top rock, and that'll prepare you decently well. And then practice doing extended handstands.
Okay.
Handstands and cartwheels. But handstands are more effective for training purposes. They tend to have That's not true. I did a bit of capoeira when I was in Salvador, in Bahia. But so that's part number one. For the language, do you speak any Spanish or no?
Yes, I actually used to be fluent in Spanish, and now when I spend time in Spanish countries, it comes back pretty quickly.
Okay. All right. So hold on. I will show you what I would use. All right. So the first thing I would try to find, and I'm not sure if they have it in CD or otherwise, but the Foreign Service Institute, it might be the State Department, actually has a guidebook plus audio. I had to get it in cassette, which
Oh, man.
back in the day, but this wasn't that long ago. That was the only format they offered for field agents who speak Spanish and need to learn Portuguese.
Oh, perfect.
So I would look for that. So FSI is Foreign Service Institute or State Department.
Okay.
Try to find it. I'm not sure if you will. The other approach that I take, and you could certainly mail order a lot of this, is because I feel like you have L1, which is your first native language, and you have L2, which are the foreign languages. And I like to connect those foreign languages. So these books right here are by Larousse. And
Okay.
you can see it says Espanol. Espanol, that is written in Portuguese. So these are books for Brazilians who want to learn Spanish. And then
All right.
all you have to do is read the second column first instead of the first column first, and you can use this to learn Brazilian Portuguese. Of course, I think we have a mutual friend, Benny, who could give you tips on using.
Oh, yeah, I'll be hounding him like crazy.
Yeah, on Skype for vocal practice. Brazilian Portuguese has a few things that are a bit challenging about it. The open vowels are very challenging, and you'll want to practice your pronunciation with a native speaker, which is very easy to do via Skype. I'm sure Benny can make recommendations, or Live Mocha or something like that. And that's about it, man. I would say also get high-frequency word flashcards, such as something like Vized, VIS-ED.com, and make double, triple sure that you are getting whenever possible. If you can't, that's okay, but make sure you're trying to get Brazilian Portuguese instead of Portuguese, because they are not the same.
Okay.
Much like kind of Mexican Spanish, Spanish, but it could even be more divergent than that. So those would be my two recommendations, and have fun with it. Don't view it as a lifetime project. View it as this project to get you to Carnival so that you have a lot of fun.
Okay.
So don't feel like you have to get to the point of being a native speaker by that point in time, because that pressure will slow down your progress. And Carnival, you're going to have a blast either way. The Portuguese will just make it a lot more fun.
Very cool. Dude, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your hectic day to stop by and hang out with us and the Nerd Fitness crew.
Yeah, my pleasure. And if people want, people want to see samples of the book, free chapters, etc., I've put at least a couple hundred megs up on BitTorrent so they can find tons of stuff, video and photos and chapters and whatnot. And then 4hourchef.com has sample chapters and everything else. So hopefully people enjoy it.
Very cool. Yeah, everybody else, make sure you check out The 4-Hour Chef. It's an awesome book. Seriously, I've read it all the way through, and I'm going to start cooking ossobuco, I think, either tonight or tomorrow, depending on when I can get to the grocery store.
Yeah, man, give it a go. It's good.
I will. All right, thanks, dude.
Cool. Take it easy.